I'm Allison again from Sound Horticulture, and today I want to explain to you kind of a different concept. A lot of you may have already heard about this, but it's called the aphid banker plant. The aphid banker plants are used in controlled horticulture, generally in greenhouse management, all sorts of different crop systems, anything that might be susceptible to aphid pressure. As you might know, there's some great predators and parasites for aphids in your growing system that are easily released as beneficial insects and parasitoids. So the parasitoid wasps, Aphidius species, come in many different ranges. There's Aphidius colmani, Aphidius urbi, Aphidius matricariae, and each of them have different functions. So we could go into that later. But the idea is people want to establish these. They may or may not be naturally occurring in your area. So generally greenhouse growers will augment their grow with various releases of whatever's needed depending on the type of aphid that you might have. So you got to think through that first, and you can read about that on our website. But the focus here today is, what do we do if we want to sustain the Aphidius, the parasitic wasps? What do we do? How do we do this? There's this crazy concept which works really well, and it involves buying another aphid in. And this other species of aphid is a Rhopalociphem. It's actually a cereal oat aphid. It's native to back east. It's fairly ubiquitous at this point. We want to be careful how we use it, where we use it, in what greenhouse operations, because when it's eating, it's not eating your cash crop. It is interested only in basically a monocot. So wheat or barley or rye grass are generally used as your starter material. This is a really ugly old banker plant that I kept going from August when we got it, and you may or may not see, we could do a close-up, but there's little tiny black aphids on here. These aphids are just going to stay right on the grass. And this is an example of a pretty shabby, tired banker plant. It was just basically living in this cage under our grow lights. So what I'm going to show you here is a couple of different options. You can grow your own and keep them going, you know, as many do, or you can buy in a start. So generally they come 4 per pack, and I really love this supplier. This is our friends back east at Sierra Biologicals again, and these are done on 4-inch rock wool cubes, and you can see how heavily they're sown. There's just, gosh, 200 seeds probably on top of this rock wool cube, and they've then been infested with the rice or with the cereal aphid, and you can see little black spots throughout this little emerging canopy of grass. So as the leaf unfurls, the aphids go crazy because they can just start feeding on the blades of grass as they unfurl. So this little guy would be normally 4 per set, and what I would say to a grower at this point is if they got a set of 4, and actually I have the sharp scissors with me. Let me see, usually I do this with a knife, but I'll just give you an example. So, let's see if this will cut. Okay. Yeah, wow, that's nice and sharp. Okay, so for instance, you can cut one of these cubes, tear it apart gently, into 4 pieces. So you could conceivably put one of these little cubes per, say, 6-inch pot. Okay, so if these are 4s, but if you had a 6-inch pot or even an 8-inch pot, you could place one of these into a 6-inch pot, bury it up to the crown, top it off with a little fresh soil, and then add some more seed. So then you would seed over the top of the pot. Sorry, I didn't bring the empty pot, but that way these, as you can see, will germinate even on the soil surface as long as the soil surface remains wet. So these things germinate so quick, like within a couple days. So that would be one way of doing these banker plants. Again, one rock wool cube, 4-inch, could separate into 4 6-inch pots. So that's how you do it if you're purchasing them. So say you've gotten a bunch of these going and you've kept them covered. Some people will put a hairnet over each pot and keep that pot basically quarantined so that you can grow the aphids on for a few weeks before they get attacked by a parasitoid wasp. So in order to really build your stash, your stock, because you're creating your own, basically your breeder plant here, you would have to keep those protected from any incoming native parasitoids, or perhaps if you were trying to grow them in a greenhouse that already had overwintering Aphidius wasps, you'd have to keep those separate or covered. So some people will create like a boxed screen over a rack, or build their own screen material, preferably using thrip screening and realizing how sneaky these little parasitoids are. They're so tiny. You don't see them coming, but they will try to squeak in any crack or crevice to get to the aphid that they can parasitize. So once they parasitize your pet aphids that you're growing, they've injected, of course, with their ovipositor, they've deposited an egg in each of these little aphids that you're growing, and those incubate for 5 to 7 days, depending on temperature. When they are ready to hatch out, there's a new parasitoid inside. So they've killed the aphid, they've destroyed it, and the way you can tell they're parasitized is if they basically are turning from their natural live color of like a dark green to basically kind of a coppery, dry, papery mummy. So you've heard the term aphid mummy, so you'll see what an aphid mummy looks like, all puffed up and crusty like a crouton. So then what the parasitoid wasp does is it cuts a little hole with its little teeth and pops open the back hatch and will hatch out of there and fly out into your cash crop. So again, you've only quarantined these for a few weeks just to keep growing them, and then releasing the Aphidius wasps over top of them. They will fly and migrate to where the aphids are. They'll develop a population there in your greenhouse, depending on how you've spaced them, and then from there start populating the rest of your greenhouse. So once you have this whole concept going and you're rocking and rolling with it, it's great. You may choose to do something crazy like this, like keeping some Aphidius or some of the aphids going. And in this case, this is a pretty dried up sample, but I can see that there's thousands of these all the way through, all the way down to the crown of the plant. So in this case, I'm gonna feed most of this plant to my praying mantis pet that's at home, and she got locked in a little tiny greenhouse. She came to visit me, and I wanna make sure she has some food. So I'm just gonna inoculate these little grass starts. I just sowed these 4 days ago, so the first blades of grass are just unfurling, and there are aphids all throughout this. So I'm gonna just chop a few more for good measure, and because they're just barely surviving now on the tail end of the green. So I'm gonna take these like this, and I'm gonna slide them in to a cage, and I'm gonna just zip this up now. And within 2 or 3 days, because I don't want the grass to get stretchy, I'll put them under lights and keep them, tight like this. Then I'll just pull off the dead grass, and then I'll guard this for another 10 to 14 days prior to placing it out in the greenhouse. And that's about it. So you can imagine that you can start your own, generate your own feedstock for these little aphids. And it's pretty fun, pretty easy to do. If you're really busy and short on staff, you might think twice about this whole rigmarole. But I tell you, if you've got a dedicated IPM person in your operation, it may be well worth your time and energy to set up something like this for yourself and see how great it works. So with that, thank you. And if you have any more questions, find us and we'll be happy to walk through it with you in lots of detail. Thanks.